Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Project Egg Show. Today, we have the honor of speaking with Christian Hageseth. Christian has over 9 years of experience in the Colorado legal cannabis industry and over 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur. He founded Green Man Cannabis in Denver, Colorado in 2009 and has been active in the industry across multiple states. Green Man is well known for its connoisseur-grade craft cannabis and many High Times Cannabis Cup wins, which is the industry's most prestigious award for product excellence. In 2015, High Times magazine recognized Christian with an industry Trailblazer Award. His experience in the legal cannabis industry and his predictions for its future are outlined in his book, Big Weed, published by Macmillan in 2015. That's extremely impressive, Christian. It is a total honor, an extreme honor, a super honor to be speaking with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Ben, it's a pleasure to be here already. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in.
Yeah.
You and I spoke a little bit before this interview about a super secret, special mystery gift.
That's right.
For everybody that sticks around until the very end. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would highly encourage you to stick around for this because we got something good for you. You're not going to want to miss it. So
you're not going to want to miss it. It's that good.
So stick around till the end. But let's dive in for the second time. We'll dive a little bit deeper. What is your story?
I think that my simple story is that I'm a lifelong entrepreneur. I remember as a kid, and I think the first time I heard the word entrepreneur, and I was trying to figure out how to spell it, like in school, and I realized what the meaning was. I was like, that's me. That's what I want to do. And I don't even think at the time I really knew why, but it just resonated with me. And then I went to college. And I was that guy in college, I think there's a lot of people like this. I always had a side hustle. I was my freshman year, we all had to move out of our dorm over winter break so they could fix it. So I lined up a moving and storage service for everybody because we literally had to move out for like 3 weeks, move your stuff out, put it in storage, move it back. And so I went and rented a big warehouse and got a truck with some buddies, and we did all this labor and did that. And then, different things throughout college. And after I graduated college, I started an ice cream company up in Seattle, ran it for a few years and sold it off, and then got into tech, and then started a mortgage bank with a guy here in Denver. And we rolled up mortgage brokerages. And then 2008 came along, and I was heavy in real estate and just got crushed. Crushed. And in 2009, my good friend and attorney invited me to play golf. And one of the other guys that was in our foursome was about to open a legal dispensary here in Denver. And so we're playing golf, and I've got this chronicled in my book as well. And I've got this little one hitter that I brought along that had some really old brown weed in it, but it's like, I thought it was fine. And this guy pulls out this bag of weed that's like incredible quality. And he had 3 different strains, and he's talking to me about what it was. And I was like, I kind of lit up. I'm like, this is real? And he's like, yeah, I'm about to open a dispensary. Like, well, what's a dispensary? And he's like, well, it's legal in Colorado now, and you can do it. And so we start this conversation on the golf course. And by the time, golf takes, 3-4 hours. By the time we finished, it had a great time. I was really fired up by what I had heard. This guy had offered to work with me on some level. He had been an entrepreneur, but hadn't done entrepreneurship to my level. I had started significant companies with hundreds of employees and scaled up all the infrastructure it takes to make a company work. And he hadn't, but he really knew a lot more about cannabis, and especially legal cannabis in Colorado, than I did at the time. And so after that round of golf, the next day I go in and go to one of his stores, and I meet with this doctor who writes me my recommendation for medical cannabis. And the doc, he was 81 years old at the time. I still remember. And it's funny because now I know his son. I know the doctor's son. He dates a family member of mine. And And so we put it together that was his dad. And, it was this, but this guy was this really old doc. He writes this script. I get my recommendation. I go over, and the first time I walk into a dispensary, they put out all this marijuana in front of me in these big jars. And the guy's like, well, what do you like? I'm like, I don't know. Like, what's the difference? It's like, what do you mean? What do I like? I like marijuana. Like, oh, yes. And he goes, no, you want indica or sativa, and this one's blueberry, and this one's super lemon haze, and this is a skunk. And you're just like, I don't know. And so I started my my learning. I sort of jumped into the deep end of the pool at a time when it was, and at the time in Colorado, I was under what they call the caregiver model. And it was really before medical marijuana and before recreational marijuana. And so I got involved in really the gray market time. And then I started working with this guy for about 6 weeks, talking about business plans, how we could fit in, how I might find my space, my way in the industry. And then there's a meeting at the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment in July of 2009. So I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary here in July. And at that meeting, the Department of Health decided that a caregiver, which was the model at the time, could have more than 5 patients. And for every patient you had, you could grow 6 plants. And so being an entrepreneur, I went and signed up 300 of my friends and family that were interested in having a medical marijuana card. And I had the right then to grow 6 plants each, so 1,800 plants. And I leased a warehouse, 5,000 square feet, and put an ad on Craigslist to hire a grower, which is actually a very funny part of the story too, because you can imagine, like, you got all these illegal marijuana growers, right? Now they're seeing an ad on Craigslist for marijuana grower needed. I mean, the suspicion level in these people that would actually call, they'd be like, what's your name? John. His name's not John, and they're trying to be like so discreet. And so eventually I was able to hire a grower, a guy that had grown marijuana, obviously illegally before, but was good at his craft. And so I had 1,800 plants and 300 patients and a building and a guy that knew how to grow. And that's how it started. And over the next, for the first 3 years, I lived in the grow. I officed there every day. That's where I spent my days. I was touching the plant, working with the team, and it grew significantly. It grew very quickly in those first 3 years. About a year into it, the state of Colorado came by and said we had to, for the medical marijuana. So the regime was shifting from the caregiver model to the medical marijuana model, and it came with a whole new set of regulations. Chief among those was a requirement that we be vertically integrated. And so at the time I was a grower, and they said, well, you can legally grow it, but if you grow it, you have to sell 70% of it at your own dispensary. So if you were a grower, you also had to own a dispensary. And so I was a grower, and I went out and I found 4 dispensaries that didn't have their own grow. And so everyone in Colorado was doing this crazy matchmaking at the time where, the state came by, I think they gave us like 100 days or something. And so, it was like speed dating for all the marijuana entrepreneurs in the state, would be meeting up with people, and then you say, like, okay, I think we can work with them, but then you got to figure out if you're going to work with them. For everyone who's ever had a business partner, that your business partner it's like a marriage, right? Like you're going to spend, 8 to 12 hours a day with these people. You're going to have to earn money and figure out what bills to pay when and make all these big decisions. And the stress on those relationships really requires that you have good alignment, that the personalities match, your communication styles match, your goals match. And so this speed dating to find partners was, it was littered with failure. There's people I talked to for 30 seconds, and I'm sure people talk to me for 30 seconds and like, no way. There's no way I'm working with that guy. But I found 4 people to partner with. And so partnered with 4 dispensaries, and then I bought into a 5th dispensary at the time. And then that was it, man. We're really sailing. And then got full in medical and did that for years. And then in 14, we got the recreational marijuana, adult use recreational marijuana was approved. And I've been doing that ever since as well. And so I've been in continuous operation in Colorado for 10 years. So I put a plant in the ground in September of 2009. And so in September of this year, I've had a plant in the ground every day for 10 years operating. And then I've done a lot around the world with cannabis as well. I've been on state applications everywhere from Hawaii to Maryland, and everywhere in between, 11 states now. We did some investing in medical marijuana research in Israel a couple of years ago. I went over to Canatech in Israel 4 years ago for the first time. So it was right after my book came out. Big Weed was published in 15. And so I went over in 15 right after it came out, and was asked to speak at it, which was awesome. So Israel is really the home of medical marijuana research. An interesting fact for a lot of Americans that don't know this is that so when there was this full prohibition on medical research of cannabis in the US, not allowed, no money to be spent, the NIH, the National Institute of Health, was funding Dr. Raphael Mechoulam in Israel at Hebrew University to study the therapeutic benefits of cannabis. And so Mechoulam was the first guy to identify the THC molecule as being psychoactive, and the CBD molecule, which has obviously taken on a whole new meaning lately with the Farm Bill passing. But they did all this research. And so when we got over there to Israel, here we're having conversations about oh man, how do you grow it? How do you sell it? What are you going to package it in? And we go over there and it's like we're meeting with, PhDs in plant science and botany and biochemistry. And they're like the level of conversation that we got over there was, it was like that recognition you have at some point of there's a difference between men or boys and men, and you realize you're one of the boys. You're like, man, we don't know shit, And so it was really eye-opening. And so we made a couple investments there in medical research and followed that through for a couple of years, and really to sort of get integrated into that side of what's going on with cannabis. So. That's a little on my background. So I've been in the cannabis industry 10 years. Like you said, won 6 Cannabis Cups, highest award for product excellence, 35 other first place awards. Our dispensary is named one of the best dispensaries in the US last year. Wrote a book, High Times Trailblazer Award. 2 years ago, we started franchising in the cannabis space. So we are currently the only franchisor in the cannabis industry, and we just won an award with the International Franchise Association as one of the 10 top deals of last year, because we were the first to franchise in the cannabis industry. And now we're currently taking our company public. So cannabis has been very, very good to me. It's been a very eventful 10 years. And I think I've almost failed in this business probably 25 times in those 10 years. Either for we had a full product recall a couple of years ago that was crushing. The business is capital constrained. It's very hard to get outside capital to come into the business. Regulatory issues. Squabbles with landlords, where one of our landlords, we had been in a building for 4.5 years. And so at 4 years, our renewal came up. And we renewed our lease for another 4 years. And 6 months later, the landlord came in and said, marijuana smells and you need to leave. And it's like, you didn't realize that in the first 4.5 years? There's nothing had changed. And so they kicked us out, and we had to figure out how to move this license and everything on the fly. And so I was actually talking to my attorney today on something. He goes, we call you here at the office? I'm like, no, what? He goes, we call you the juggler. Because somehow you keep all these balls in the air and you never drop any of them, and we can't figure out how. So I think I was joking with him. I said, I think my success in cannabis is more related to my survival than to my actual success. But so that's a little bit about it, man. But I've always been wired to be an entrepreneur. I love nothing more than having an idea and working with people to create a meaning around it, and products and services. And you get other people engaged, and you say, well, I'll do this, you do this, and together we're going to put this thing out into the world, and the world's going to tell us if they like it, because they'll buy it. And if they buy it, then we'll know that we're okay, and how much of it they buy will tell us how okay we are. Are you just okay enough to survive? Are you really able to do something with this? So I think entrepreneurship, for me, the real joy of it has always been the creative aspects. It's my I say I don't sing, I don't dance, I don't paint. But my creative outlet is really through entrepreneurship, where I think this happens for a lot of entrepreneurs. You have this epiphany, and you're like, this is a great idea. And then you get all fired up and you go out and you make it happen. So, and I think that is the creative outlet for an entrepreneur. So anyway, man, long-winded answer to your question of how did I get here. So that's it.
Let's jump back into your childhood. What did it smell like?
Cinnamon rolls. When you say, what does it smell like? The first thing jumps into my head is my dad used to make these cinnamon rolls from scratch about twice a month. And typically do it on like a Sunday night, and then he'd let them rise overnight, and then he'd put them in the oven on Monday morning. But it's probably the most distinct smell memory I have as a kid. And it was really just a very, very happy memory as well. What did yours smell like?
I've never been asked that question before.
It's like tennis. You hit the ball, I hit it back.
I love tennis. It smelled a lot like candles. Because we spoke about this, but I'm Jewish.
Yeah.
And
my wife is, so we light the candles as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And every Friday night for Shabbos, we used to light candles, and my bubby would always cook, and it was very, very happy memory. It also smells very distinctly like my grandparents' house. That same, bubby is maybe it's Yiddish or whatever the language, it's grandma. And so, her house has a very distinct smell. And I just remember being there, and it's a smell of like family and love and food. And so that's what mine smelled like.
Yeah.
What was your relationship like with your parents growing up?
It was I think it was good. My parents divorced early in my life, and primarily grew up with my dad. And he my dad's a psychiatrist, and so we like to joke, the cobbler's kids go without shoes. So the cobbler who makes shoes and their kids don't wear them. And so my brother and I are like, how is our dad a psychiatrist? And we came out this way. Like, didn't he see some of this? But it was good. But, I think as growing up, my dad worked a lot to support us. And so I was a latchkey kid. And so I came home to an empty house. And I think in the way that I grew up, is I found a lot of that real base level motivation that has led me to become the person I am but today. And it created the way I came up. I felt loved, but sort of alone. There weren't a lot of people around a lot of times, and so it caused me as a person to be intentional about looking for these things that I could really find who I was and find a way to express who I am into the world. It's funny you asked it, because I was just talking to my dad the other day, and when I got off the phone with them, I had this same realization. So it's interesting that you would ask this question right now. This was 2 nights ago. And I was talking to my wife about it, and she actually said it. She goes, it's that, and there's a very specific part of this talk with my dad. She said, that's the reason you are the person you are, and so I do think for many of us, we're very affected by our early relationships, and primarily our family relationships. They help sort of create who we want to be. And I've always sort of long held that people kind of fall into one of two camps. You either have so much respect for your family that you want to emulate them. I want to be like my dad, my uncle, my grandfather, my grandmother, my mom. Like you say that you identify with something. You're like, I want to be like that. And you start to pattern your life to do that. Or in my case, what I said is I totally love and respect my parents, but I didn't want to emulate them. I didn't want to be like them. And so a lot of my life decisions have been crafted around sort of doing things not differently from them, but doing it my way. and not feeling compelled to like do it their way. You know, I didn't follow my parents' politics. I didn't follow my parents into religious beliefs and practices. I didn't follow my parents' footsteps professionally. I didn't follow them geographically. I went away to school and moved to moved out of state and did a number of things, So, but it was a good relationship. And I think I just sort of fell into that camp where through all these things that came together in my life, I realized that I wanted to be my own man and find my own expression of that, and didn't feel compelled to, again, emulate anything that I had seen in my family.
Now, it's interesting to me that, you're speaking a lot almost about like your identity growing up.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get clear on what was truly your identity and your true nature and who you were versus any sort of external influences that may not truly be you, but could be easily confused as you?
Yeah. So we're gonna go into the deep end now, and so you got to take off the snorkel and put on the scuba tank because we're going deep. But for me, we were talking about Judaism, and again, my wife is Jewish, and so we culturally, and my family is Jewish. The kids are all going bar and bat mitzvah and religious school, and we belong to temple here and all that. But for me as a kid, my dad did a great job, I think, with my brother and I, where he brought us up and got us confirmed in the Presbyterian Church, and we participated in the community around it. And I was the youngest. And so after I was confirmed, like quite literally the next day, my dad's like, listen, I think it was important to do this for us as a family, give us that sort of continuity. He goes, but my beliefs are really leading me into another practice. And so my dad at the time joined the Religious Society of Friends, the Quakers, the silent meeting version. And so there's sort of two forms of Quakers. There's the more fundamental, more like the Amish. And then there's the very liberal and progressive Quakers, which is what they call the Meeting of Friends. And so I started attending Friends meetings with my dad, probably 13, 14. And what we'd do in these, you have a group of people would come together and have moments of sort of community, and then everyone would sit down in silence and meditate. And if somebody was really moved by spirit, they might get up and share a short thought or a short story, and then sit down. And at the end, you'd get up and you'd have more community and sort of that traditional religious service and participation in community. And what I found at these Quaker meetings, was that there's this very diverse population that was drawn to the Religious Society of Friends, the silent meetings. And it was, it was like the Jewish people that go to Buddhism, right? The Jew-Boos. Like, what is it? There's more in the U.S. Most Buddhists are Jewish, or something like that. And so there's a lot of these people that were really knowledgeable, but sort of rejecting traditional religious practices, but still looking for a deep spiritual connection, that real understanding of. And I think really what it was people seeking a direct relationship with God that wasn't filtered or interpreted by any religious experience or history or expectation. And so I started doing that, and did that really pretty actively through high school. And then when I went to college, like, my world exploded, and I'm like, man, there's Catholic church I've never gone to. There's a Taoist student body. There's the Buddhist student meetings and everything. So I really became an explorer of all things, not just religious, but spiritual. And in doing that, I spent years really trying to understand in that sense, like, who am I? I can't just be this body that's going to walk the earth for 90 years and then fall down and turn to ashes and be gone. It just didn't make sense to me. And so I kind of had this sense that there was in fact a God, and that I had a direct relationship with that higher power. And that I had a belief too that meant that my life had some purpose to it. And that purpose might be as simple as my life has purpose, and the purpose is the one I choose. right? And maybe it's not this idea of fate, or it's not preordained, but it was that. And so as I kind of did as I was growing up again physically, and I was growing up intellectually through school and study, and through life experience, I was also really very, very involved in a spiritual practice, a spiritual realization, a self-realization. Studied a lot of religions. Truly, my hobby for years was like, I'd love to get books on like I don't know anything about that. I'm going to get a book on Islam, and I'm going to read about Islam for a while, so I can sort of, what's their worldview, and why would there be so many devotees to this, and and Buddhism, and all sort of every major religion, and really sort of found my own. I think I found myself sort of that. I think there's this sort of this spark of God in each of us, and it's that when you say like, who are you? We can describe ourselves in these very material ways. You say, well, my name's Christian, and I live in Denver, Colorado, and I'm in the marijuana business, and I'm married to Rebecca, and I've got children, and my family does this. And you're describing these very physical, worldly attributes to how you would just describe yourself. And then, but you really, I think if you say, who are you? And you're on a spiritual level, there's this feeling of who you are. There's hopefully, I think there's, I think what everyone is searching for is that on that spiritual level, you have a self-realization, and that in that self-realization, you also feel connected to other people. And that's what I came away with. And then it's really to sort of take that, the full circle on that was then my wife is a woman named Rebecca Rosen, and she's a world famous psychic medium. And she's an author of many books, and she did a television show years ago, and does a lot of mediumship for the for people all over the world, and a lot of A-list celebrities. And so years ago, this woman moves into the neighborhood, and everyone's like, "There's a psychic in the neighborhood." And and it turned out that her and I both divorced around the same time. And I went in, and she offered me a reading. We had become sort of not even friends as much as we were neighbors, and kind of we knew each other, would talk, saw each other at the pool or something, And then I went in for this reading, and she in like 45 minutes. Again, you want to talk about that spiritual sense of self that's in your soul, that's hard to describe. It's more of a feeling, and what your connection is. I sat down with Rebecca, and I think she offered me an hour reading, and it was over in like 35 minutes because she had answered all of my questions. And I left there with this profound reassurance that what I had thought, that we have a soul spark, and a connection with God, and a connection with other living sentient beings, that she confirmed that. And so I often have said this, is that I was a lifelong seeker, trying to understand the greater meaning of life and the why. And my artistic expression is through entrepreneurship. And there's a lot of that sort of creative force of the spirit that goes into both of those. And then when I met what is now my wife, she really was able to answer these questions for me in what I called authentic faith. And people of faith, you say, well, have faith in God, and He'll take care of you, kind of thing. And a lot of times when people say that, it's because my religious text says that, and so if I follow the text, then it should be good for me, and I should believe it, and that's faith. But authentic faith to me is when I realized, when I felt it in my own heart, and in my own soul, and I knew it, and it was like I literally at that moment, all of my searching and questioning just sort of fell away. And I sat there for this moment. I'm like, shit, this is really who I am. It's like, this is cool. And so my wife, it was a very big part of answering that question for me as well, in a very powerful, positive way. And then of course we ended up getting married, and then she brought me into she's from a very her brother's a rabbi, and was a rabbi in Boston for years, and then he made Aliyah and moved to Israel with his family. Her mom is very involved in the Jewish Federation around the United States and does a lot of land tours to Israel. So her family is very involved in both the Jewish religious practice and experience and community, as well as an identity with Israel and sort of the Jewish identity. And so I've had the wonderful opportunity to participate in that as well, which again sort of is reinforcing of, I think kind of what you were saying. It's like, for the there's some kind of, I think for spirit, if you're truly spiritual and you're trying to find that sense of self and feel that soul connection, you can still know who you are and feel connected on an energetic level, but feel alone, And so what I found, I think, with the Judaism and my integration into that, that network, the community, I also found a sense of belonging and family. And tonight, Shabbos, headed over to my brother-in-law's house. My kid Bobby is in town, and so we'll all celebrate, share Shabbat together, and light the candles and say the prayers. So, but that was really, I've been a lifelong seeker, and it took me, it really took me. Gosh, what am I? I'm 50. I just turned 50. So I'd say probably when I was, 40, 43, 44 to really kind of answer all those questions. So I spent hopefully just the first half of my life asking these questions, and finally feel I have some understanding of who I am.
Do you feel as if you're more of a spiritual being who is having a human experience, or that you're a human being who has a spiritual side?
Ben, that's one of my favorite expressions of what I think reality is, and I love that you brought that up. Only in my full realization of that did I recognize that I was a spiritual being having a human experience, that I wasn't a human being seeking a spiritual experience, that it really starts with the spirit, and that this human experience, the physical experience, is a projection of the soul's experience. So my wife and I use that quote all the time. So I love the fact that you would ask that question. It's very, very in line with how I see the world.
So this is something that I've actually been experiencing a little bit lately. Actually, is a pretty powerful experience, and I'm interested to get your take on it. I was meditating the other day. I actually like to go right out there. There's right to my right. There's a window, and out there is a swing, and there's like some greenery and some forests over there. So I was sitting on the swing. I was meditating, and I felt for whatever reason, I feel like I got really lucky that I got to have this feeling, but it felt like there was a space between my mind and my body, and that somehow, maybe it was my consciousness, maybe whatever it was, but I explored that space, and I got to the other side. And what it felt like on the other side was this vast expanse, or a vast, ever expansive openness. And it was so comforting and beautiful, because it was like, wow, I'm this little blip of energy in this enormous, just insanely beautiful and unlimited pool of energy. And what the realization was, or maybe the theory, or the thought is, are we not vessels that energy channels through, or like, do we tap into that energy? Like, I don't know, but
yeah. I feel you. I do. I absolutely. I totally get what you're saying there, and I've gotten the same place in meditation, or something similar. I want to claim that. Where I agree. I think we're on this core level, the soul is a form of energy that we probably don't fully understand. And even when you and I have a conversation, we say energy. If we had somebody here that's knows physics or an electrician, they're going to say, well, that's not energy. We know all the laws of energy. And that doesn't fit any of those, but there's an energy to it. And I think that where you were saying, you felt that you had crossed over into this vast expanse, you felt yourself there. I feel similarly. I feel like a sentience, a knowing of that other things have a spiritual experience. And it's funny, you mentioned your dog was able to open your door and walk into your office when we were talking beforehand, right? And it's like most people who have a dog are like, oh, my dog has a soul. Like, like the dogs they're kind of there. But dolphins and whales, right? I think there's other animals that most human beings would agree have a soul and possibly a spiritual experience. But I think more broadly, I feel that in everything. I think all of creation has these elements of a spiritual sentience to it, even if it's not an intellectual or emotional knowing, or that I don't know if a rock is sitting there having an emotional, intellectual experience of life, but I do think that there is a spiritual sentience to a rock. And then you look around the universe, and there's all this mass that may also have that, but then there's also all the space in between, which might have it as well. And it's for me, that what you're talking about, that meditative experience, is going and reconnecting with that and trying to get away from the vessel, right? Because our vessels, which, and we use a bunch of the same terminology, you and I, the vessel is the way that we can experience this world. And the vessel enables us to interact with other physical beings in this world. It enables us to see through our eyes and taste through our mouth, and there's a lot of joy in that, and touch and all the other senses. But it's also very limiting, because it's putting on lenses and restrictions. And so the things that we are able to experience, if you say, well, my life experience is defined by my body and what my body can do, and the rules of physics that apply as I understand them, and gravity is always true. And it's like, well, it's true in the physical world, but does the soul actually experience gravity? If you can have a perception outside of your physical vessel, I think a lot of those, what we would call the rules of physics, start to fall away, but there's still an energy there that we can share in. And so I absolutely agree with you. And I love that. And you find you have your happy place. I have my happy place as well at home. I have a particular place that I meditate every day, and it's outside, and it's got a nice view, and it's very comforting for me. But I seek the same thing, to get released from the vessel, from the physical body for a minute, to reconnect with spirit, with a higher power, my perception of God. And I find that to be very grounding to me. And I get, kind of looping it back to entrepreneurship. It's in that grounding of my soul that I can get away from that sort of relentless pressure of entrepreneurship, of the chaos of trying to create something out of nothing. Because the world becomes very uncertain then. And so you have to kind of return to this place and be like, all right, like, I need to know me. And, maybe a great example is if you've ever been out on a boat on really, really big seas, you realize that, okay, I'm not feeling well. Then what you need to do is you go someplace and you focus on the horizon, right? And you have to see the bigger picture. You have to get your body oriented to something that's not doing this. And for me, the world is always doing this, especially as an entrepreneur in the cannabis space. There's a lot of upheaval and things that turn out. And also I have teenage daughters, I should say. That's as challenging as being an entrepreneur in the cannabis space. And so you have to, for me, meditation and that spiritual experience is like being on that boat and being able to look at that point on the horizon and reorient myself to something that's bigger than me and more steady. And I find it very calming.
So you've been able to achieve incredible things from a professional point of view. And now we're seeing this whole spiritual side that I think is beautiful. And I feel very grateful that, we've gone down this path. I didn't expect that at all, and I'm very grateful for that. Do you feel like there is that common theme that has allowed you to almost combine the two? I mean, I know you're talking about how you meditate and it, it helps you see the bigger picture and get back in it and get refocused and, continue. But I guess what I'm asking is, what maybe skills or values are there that cross over that you've used in order to achieve the incredible things that you have on both sides?
Mm-hmm. Talking to my attorney just this morning on the way to work, and he was calling me the juggler, and that whole thing. And it was to do what I have done has taken a lot of strength, and I think it's taken a lot of strength in character. It's taken a lot of physical strength. It's taken strength being willing to persist through those challenges. And the spiritual connection for me to that is that I have found a source of unlimited power through my spiritual experience, because I define myself as a spiritual being having a human experience. And so in the human experience, everything is limited. And so if I was seeking strength to be persistent, to overcome adversity, to take the next step, to go the extra mile, all those things that seem to be required by most for worldly success, that the source for me for that is a spiritual source. And so I don't question if I can go further. I know I can, and sometimes my body gets tired, and sometimes I joke because in my work anymore, I don't actually do anything. I'm like, I don't grow marijuana anymore. I don't sell it. I don't do the marketing. I don't do the accounting. And so my kids are like, what do you actually do? And I said, I talk all day. I talk to people. I communicate. I share vision. I align people. I get it all working. And so sometimes I finish a day or a week and I'm like, no, I can't say another word. I am tired of speaking, but whatever it is, whatever my physical earthly challenges are, I reach back into the spiritual for my source. So I think the part of my success and maybe some other entrepreneurs' failures is if your source of renewal of energy, your source of power comes from things defined in this world, you're limited, and sometimes for people, it's like, listen, I was born into a wealthy family and we have all this money. I'm unlimited. I can do whatever I want because my earthly power is so great. And then sometimes those people find themselves, 3 generations, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. And so there are many, many people out there that grew up to a family with money and now find themselves having none. And they might be challenged because they don't know how to find that source of their own power, their own renewal in anything other than the physical world. And so I think that a very strong analogy of where how my spiritual perspective, my spiritual experience is helped me to succeed in entrepreneurship.
So I'm interested in understanding your philosophy on connection, because you mentioned how being a spiritual being connected to the universe, the whatever, but also being connected to other people, that at some level has its own beauty.
Mm-hmm.
But then in like day to day, there's also, you have to build connections with other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested in learning about your philosophy on developing deep, meaningful, and genuine connection with another person.
Mm-hmm. I think I look at this in a very simple way, that it's, you have to know yourself to start with. And then you have to be able to see the other person, other people, other everything in the world, for what it is, how it sees itself, what's important to it. And so for me, I think building connection is very easy, but it starts with, you have to know you on that level. You have to know yourself. You know, I think it's certainly, as we're talking, it's at a deeper level, it's very helpful to know yourself spiritually, but even if it's on a more superficial level, you just have to know who you are and not fake it, and not change, you know, with every person you're around, be somebody else, be a chameleon that always fits the situation. You're never true to yourself with that. And so to be able to know yourself, and then to see the other. And again, the other could be another person, which is the most obvious, an animal. I think we look at the planet that we live in. I think communities have sort of their own spiritual essence, and you can come to those and be open to, all right, like, who is it? What is it that I'm connecting with? And I think it's, it's really hard to, I don't think this is going to mean as much as it means to me, but to approach those situations with an open mind and an open heart. And the mind is knowing, and the heart is, again, that sensing, the feeling of seeking the connection with somebody else, you know. And we've probably all had an experience with somebody, with a person who, man, they were aggressive, they were abrasive, they came out swinging for whatever reason. And I think, you know, the great majority of the time, what you'll find out is there's something going on with that person at that moment that has brought them to that state. And it's probably not who they are all the time. And so part of that connection is seeking to understand who they are and where they are and what's important to them at the moment. Because listen, man, we all have bad moments, you know, and we all have great moments. And it's, it's one thing to acknowledge and be like, oh man, I really feel you when somebody's having a great moment. But a real connection also is to connect with them when they're having a bad moment, when they're not their best self, when maybe they feel disconnected from their own spiritual experience. Maybe they feel like the world is handing it to them in not a good way, and that their bills are late, and their dog ran away, and their favorite song never comes on the radio, and everybody else is getting a break, and I never get a break, and I like this political party, but the other one's in power, and like they feel like nothing's going their way. Like, can you still find the way to connect with that person and to share, and to find a way to communicate and share on that level, you know? And so I think some of the practical ways that happens is that, even in business relationships, which are the most, as an entrepreneur, I have thousands of business relationships, and in my family, I have less than 100, so by number, I have very many more professional relationships, but to take it beyond the professional level, and I'm a huge fan of getting a meal with people because it's an opportunity to, we always talk a little bit about our business together, but then it's that opportunity to take a break, and we're sharing a meal, and you start saying, so, you married? Do you got kids? Where are you from? What do you do? What's important to you? And it kind of quickly, those types of conversations will morph into really, finding out what's important to the other person and who they are and how they were brought up and what their hopes and fears are. You don't have to be so overt to ask those questions that are, deeply probing, but seeking to connect with people that way, I think, is what ends up doing it. And I'll say candidly, I think a huge part of my success in not just this industry, but in the world, is that I do seek to have genuine relationships with people on that level, and to understand them for who they are and what's important to them. And that connection is a powerful thing that, when you see those people again, it's like you have a great friend from high school that you really connect with. And, I know so many people that have these relationships, right? And you're like, oh man, if I haven't seen this guy for years, the first 3 minutes are, dude, how are you? And then after that, it's like, it goes back to just how we were. Like we know each other at that level. And I know guys that have been out of high school for 50 years, and they run into an old classmate, and they're like, oh man, 5 minutes of catching up. What have you been doing for the last 50 years? And then before you know it, we're telling the same jokes. We're laughing about the same stuff we did. We're they're connected on that level. And so I think once you connect with people, it's you establish a connection, and it's easy to come back and find the familiarity of what you had created to re-experience it. So once you have a connection, it's easy to come back and find that path again, because you've both already done it.
When do you feel most connected to somebody else? Like, I know you just spoke a lot about that, but let's say somebody is trying to build a meaningful connection with you. When do you feel most connected to that other person?
For me, again, I think it's really the opposite of the entrepreneurial spirit. Is I definitely feel the most connected with people when it's on a personal level, and as I'm an entrepreneur, yes, but I'm also the CEO and chairman of a company that has a lot of employees and a lot of investors, a lot of stakeholders. Our stakeholders are the communities we work in, and the city council, and the governor, and our elected officials. And there's a lot of people that I work with. And in the professional sense, and for good reason, there's people that have expectations out of me that aren't really about me as a person. They're about me as my role. That I sign their paychecks. I make hire and fire decisions. I set the strategy of the company. I open stores and close stores. I lobby at our state capitol. I lobby in DC. And so I have these relationships that are very professionally based. I can have good relationships, and occasionally you can get those to click over and become those more meaningful ones. But I definitely have the more meaningful ones with the people that I really share more of the personal side of life experience. And it doesn't have to be the super personal, but it's just willing to open up to the other person on a way that's more than professional. And so I'd say, again, a handful of my colleagues here at work, we have very deep relationships. They're professionally, their origin was a professional relationship, but we chose to engage each other personally. And that's where I find the most meaning and the most joy, really. And obviously the greatest example of that is truly my family. It's my wife and my kids and my brother and my parents. Because that's a personal relationship. It started personally. We're involved. We care about each other. I want to know what they want. What's important to them is important to me, and what's important to me is important to them. And not just on a superficial level. And again, not that you don't have expectations from each other about what can you do for me in this world, but it's caring and choosing to. When both sides choose to care about each other on that level, that's where I find the greatest connection. But there's a lot of people out there looking to do that. I've found there's a lot of people that are looking for that. Again, it sort of goes back to that idea of, like, when you realize that you have a God spark, you have your own soul, that you're a spiritual being having a human experience, then you are looking for connection to other spiritual beings having a human experience. And to do that, you have to get beyond the human experience part and make that soul connection. And I think that there are millions and millions of beings in this world that seek that type of connection with people who recognize, feel the same way and recognize something. And listen, everyone's got their own language around how they might describe, most people aren't going to say I have a God spark and it's my soul, right? But they have their own language to say the same thing. So it's seeking out like-minded people who want to have that level of engagement.
We've touched on it a little bit, but what's your greatest theory?
My greatest theory? I think, again, a very, very high level, my greatest theory is that this is going to go however deep we're about to go a lot deeper. There's from the physics side, it was called the Big Bang. And there's a spiritual concept. There are many spiritual concepts as well around a shattering. And both through the Big Bang and through these spiritual shatterings, imagine, the singularity existed, and then everything exploded out, on a very physical analogy to this. And spiritually, there's sort of the same concept. And now we've got these fragments of energy, of creation, that have been spread all throughout both physical space and energetic space. And my greatest theory is that God's hope and intention for all of us, all these little specks of energy that are now both living on this physical world and the spiritual level, are able to, through, and I would say on a spiritual level, is doing this through multiple lifetimes, 1,000 lifetimes kind of thing. So you get all these different spiritual beings living 1,000 lifetimes and learning all these lessons. And I think what God's hope for us is that we come back together in a way and realize our oneness, and that this experience, that the initial, the Big Bang, the shattering, that the intent is to create an opportunity for these now constituent parts that now feel an individual identity to then choose to, through life experience, through wisdom, through intention, to recombine and to something that is bigger than us. Because in my experience, that's what God feels like. God feels like a sort of this higher power that has many constituent parts. In polytheism, they obviously had, there was many gods, there's many definitions of God. And then, through monotheism, we said, well, all those aspects are in one God. And maybe that's part of that story as well, is that we start to realize that we're, listen, if I've got a God spark in me, there's like a part of me that is divine, but the ability to truly be divine is to bring all those divine parts back together and choose to work together in an intentional way with purpose and, and setting, and then, well, who knows what at that point. I think that's well beyond my conception as I sit here today, but that something would, after we come back together, then there would be sort of a next step. We'd say, okay, now that we've come back together and we're this much stronger, what are we going to do with it? And I was reading an interesting thing the other day. A Nobel Prize winning scientist was basically saying that the way we live on planet Earth right now is completely not sustainable. That the way that humans use resources, the way we've organized our economy, that the expectations we all develop around lifestyle and how we're going to be able to live is completely non-sustainable. And we will absolutely both exhaust our economic resources and then exhaust the physical resources of our planet if we don't do something. And obviously, I think this is one of those messages we hear all the time, especially around like climate change and global warming right now. Is like Al Gore did years ago, that documentary put together. And he's like, listen, man, I'm putting this together because if we don't change right now, we're fucked, right? And so you're like, as a group, you're like, well, so I would hope that through this sort of, again, the Jewish expression, tikkun olam, right, to heal the world, is that bringing that there will be these constituent parts of our spiritual experience coming back together. That's the healing of the world, and now we've got our actions can come from a greater place, and then if we can do that, then we can do what Al Gore asked us to do. And we can all cooperate and stop doing the things that humankind is doing to contribute to climate change. We can do those things that would be more selfless, and I'd say, like, great example, one of my really pet peeves is, single-use plastic. And it's like, man, I think it's not hard to realize that, like, there's all this energy that goes into creating a plastic bottle and the plastic bag it came in. And so I'm thirsty. So I walk into the store, instead of just hitting the water fountain, I go and I buy my bottle of water, and they put it in a plastic bag, and I walk out and I drink my 12 ounces of water, and then I throw those two things away, and they're going to last for 2,000 years before they degrade. That if I do that thousands of times in my lifetime, that I'm going to create a lot of trash, right? And that future generations are going to get to live with my trash because it's not going anywhere. And so if we were able to be selfless about those things collectively, we would say, well, shit, just don't, like, single-use plastic is done. We all agree, bad practice, figure out something else. And maybe it's just we put drinking fountains everywhere, or we find a reusable alternative or something. And so, I think my big theory is that, again, there is a shattering, and now we are all floating around feeling like a spiritual being, seeking connection with each other. And the idea is that we bring those constituent parts back together, and that whatever we come back as actually has a knowingness of its own, and that we can then work collaboratively from that level to make the world a better place. And I think better is so open to interpretation, and I don't think we would really. I can't imagine that we would as we sit here today, we really would understand like what a better place would mean until we kind of come back together and have that perspective, that our perspective would change significantly when that happens. So that's my big theory. And I think in my role in that, honestly, is I just hope to contribute. And if it's 1,000 lifetimes, I mean, I don't even know what lifetime I'm on. I might not be much of a contributor at this point, but I want to. My intention is to both, I guess, starts with understand myself, seek connection, find common ground, bring people back together, try to think selflessly, try to have a perspective that's bigger than myself, that's bigger than my communities, that's bigger than the people I agree with, right? Because it's really easy to have I see the world for a better place, but I belong to this political party, and this is how we see the world, and so we're going to fix it. Yeah, well, what about, the perspective of a bigger place is, can you see the world the way your enemy would see the world? Can you see the world the way somebody you would completely disagree with would see the world? And I think that one of the challenges that I try to take on is to, like I said, I mentioned, I read a lot of books on Islam, and love it, really interesting. I'm definitely not a Muslim. I don't. The message in the Quran doesn't really resonate with me. I think there's a lot of cultural reference in the Quran that I don't understand, and it's probably a big reason why. It's similar also with Buddhism. A lot of these stories of Buddhism, I like a lot, like ideas of Buddhism, but if you ever try to read like Buddhist texts, then there are these references to different people and places that are just so foreign that it's hard to understand what they're, what are they trying to say, because they reference a thing or a place or a person, and it doesn't mean anything to you. So you lose the cultural context of all that. But can you still try to see the world the way a Muslim does? Can you see the world the way that somebody growing up in poverty, uneducated in Latin America or India or the Far East sees the world? Can you see the world the way that somebody born with incredible privilege and wealth sees the world? And not just to be, I think I would say that is that there's this incredible spectrum that's really sort of, that it's dimensional, it's not just from rich to poor or privileged to underprivileged. It's three-dimensional, it's five-dimensional. And again, you and I have a nice conversation about sort of our spiritual experience, but can we appreciate the world for the person that doesn't appreciate their spiritual experience? Can we walk a mile in that person's shoes, the atheist, the agnostic, the denier, the person that says there is no global warming, the person that says my party is right, everybody else is wrong. It's really easy to vilify those people and say, wow, just that guy's he's uninformed. He doesn't see what's going on in the world. I've got to move on. But it's really, I think that's what it is it's trying to see the world in a bigger perspective and create both the understanding has to start from within, and then create connection, between the physical beings and hopefully between the spiritual beings that reside within each vessel. And I think, again, on the big picture, like, I think it all comes together at some point, and that and it might take, it's hard to say, what it takes. I don't think on a spiritual level, I also don't think that time is necessarily linear. That, we are sitting here living on a clock, but that's very uniquely human, earthbound experience. But from, I guess, actually truly some meditations I've had, you start to realize it's like, wait a second, my soul can actually be living multiple lifetimes and multiple realities at what I perceive to be the same moment. And probably in each one, it feels like time is linear, but from a spiritual perspective, I don't think it is. And so this is all kind of, the past and the future and the present are all to some degree happening all at once. And as much as there's this physical world that we live in, where we live in this, universe defined by a big bang, and we happen to be on an exoplanet circling one ball of gas called the sun, and having this very physical experience, that there's possibly multiple universes that we don't understand, because they just, it's like right now, as we're having this conversation, like, I don't hear the radio. Do you hear the radio?
No.
But radio waves are passing by us. And so if I had a tuner and I could tune in the radio, I could in fact listen to music. Well, the radio waves are still here. They're still, just because I don't have a tuner that can interpret those radio waves, doesn't mean the radio waves aren't here. It just means that I don't have a way of understanding those without that to interpret it. And so I think that's the sort of a physical manifestation that, for me and my experience, helps to support that understanding that there's a lot of things happening that we don't see, that we don't understand, that we can't interpret, but on an energetic level, they're happening.
So, Christian, I want to thank you so much for coming on in this interview today, and being willing to go this deep with me and to share. I mean, I am truly very grateful to have been able to share this experience with you. So thank you very much.
Ben, thank you. I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, especially in cannabis. Last 10 years, I do a number of interviews like this, and they're typically about, who are you? What's your company? How do you do that? I really appreciate the depth of your questions, because I think you are touching on something that is true for a lot of people, for many, many people. In particular, I think for entrepreneurs, is that the greater realization of, all right, so you got a job, you create a product, you got a brand, but what are you really doing in life? And that I think is the greater question. I think the more important question. So I really appreciate it. And I've got, hundreds of other examples of this where we didn't get here in the conversation. And although I think what we talked about was touched on many levels, there's these kernels in what we just discussed that are so fundamental to being a person, to finding a purpose. And if that purpose happens to be entrepreneurship, or creating through song or dance or art or relationships or whatever it is, that's the real essence of both the human experience and the entrepreneurial experience. So I appreciate the depth of the questions. I do. I love these types of conversations. Again, I mentioned my brother-in-law is a rabbi, and he and I often will talk at this level, and I get a lot of joy out of these things. So I appreciate you. It's been great to meet you, and I hope we stay in touch. Sincerely, I'd love to, whenever our paths cross, would love to again break bread and get together.
Absolutely. So I have two more quick questions for you. Then I want to talk a little bit about that mystery freebie for everybody who's listening. Then we'll wrap it on up. So Is there anything about yourself that you think is an important part of who you are that I did not ask you about today? In other words, what did I miss?
I have an incredibly high threshold for pain and bullshit that I don't think a lot of people do, that has enabled me to do what I do. There are many times where I look and say, gosh, like, my own realization, other people's comments, like, man, how did you, like my attorney calling me the juggler. He's like, dude, we don't know how you do it. And I just have a very high tolerance for a willingness to take on some of these burdens. Yeah, I think that's about it. And I told you about, I think we touched on, I think the other part is my, my wife and her work and her experience has really helped to shape me as a person. But I think we touched on that a little bit.
So I'm 24 and I'm an entrepreneur, have a few different businesses, and I say this all the time, but this show is my greatest passion, right? And I'm always interested in learning and growing. So my question to you is, what am I not thinking about at this stage in my life that I should be asking you about, like with your wisdom, your experience, your knowledge, your genius, your, all the amazing things that make you, you in whatever capacity and at whatever level, whatever that actually means. What question should I be asking you that I just wouldn't think to ask?
I don't know what the question is, but I think I know what the answer is. And I would encourage you to, I'm going to juxtapose this first, is that I think a lot of people, when they're growing up, when they're coming up, they're trying to figure out who they are. And they start to define themselves by where they grow up, the family they grow up in, what they want to do, what their parents did do, what their parents didn't do. And they start to define themselves in all these ways and try to find success through that definition. And I would really encourage you, and you just kind of touched on this, is find your purpose and passion first and build your life around that. But don't back into it and say, I know so many people that went to law school or became an accountant because they said, well, I'll be successful in life if I'm an accountant or a lawyer, because look at all the accountants and lawyers out there that have big houses, right? And like, that's success. And it's like, I think success, the real realization of success is being on purpose for what's right for you. And that's different for everybody. And you got to close out, you got to erase your mind of all these preconceptions of what the world has told you and the expectations that you have for yourself. And, because if we see somebody from high school, we still expect that person to be the way they were when we knew them, right? And so not only do we have a resistance to seeing other people change, but we have a resistance to allowing ourselves to change. And so I would just really, the encouragement is like you said, hey, this podcast, this is my passion, right? It's like, stick with your passion, embrace your passion, question your passion, find alternative outlets to your passion, but really find those things that really like fire you up and fill you up on that emotional, spiritual, intellectual level, whatever it is. Because when you're there, you know it, and you know it. And then build your life around that. But before you start figuring out who you want to be in the world and what you want to do and how you want to do it and how much money you want to make, figure out what you're passionate about. And my personal story on that is that, again, probably through, like I was saying, like probably 43, 44, I thought I enjoyed entrepreneurship because I liked business. And I thought I liked entrepreneurship because I wanted to make a lot of money. And I thought I liked entrepreneurship because I thought I'd have standing in the community. And those were things that I had learned from the world around me about what entrepreneurship meant to a lot of other people, sort of a shared perspective on it. And it took this sort of critical experience in my life to realize what I really love about entrepreneurship is it's my creative outlet. And that's what fires me up. And I didn't know that for so long. And I was working on it. But when that shift happened again, it was one of those things where it just like fell away. And it's like, wow, like I'm doing this because I love being creative. You know, I just had this experience I was sharing with my wife the other day, and this new opportunity, this new idea came up, and I got to like embrace this idea and start to bring people into this conversation and to create something where nothing was. Man, I'm sitting there talking to her, and I just got fired up, you know, and she's just like, wow, what is it? And it's like, because this is what I love to do. This is my moment, you know. And so entrepreneurship, you have to take an idea and then you got to make it work. And at some point, listen, you got to get a business license and you got to file a patent. You need to hire accountants and you got to keep books and make money and train employees. Like that to me is all secondary to finding that thing that I was passionate about and being able to do that as much as possible. You know, so I'd say for you, so you look at, say, okay, your podcast, right? Well, what is it about it? Do you like that you've created all this content, that you've created a name for yourself? Is it the engagement with your guests? Are you taking this somewhere? Are you building your sort of collective experience into something greater? Like there's some little piece of that you sort of that needs further definition from you about, okay, what about your podcast is really passionate for you? Because if you can define that and understand that and embody that, you're going to be able to transfer that to other things. You know, like entrepreneurship for me, I can do it in any industry. I can take many ideas and do it. You know, I got my entrepreneurship even came up the other day, a family vacation, and we wanted to take a picture of everybody on vacation. And it was like how we put that picture together and what we all we bought these funny socks that all represented each of us. We all put our feet together in a circle and then took a picture facing down on it with no faces are in it, but every just feet with these socks on it. And it was like, to me, that's that same joy of creation, of entrepreneurship, but it was entrepreneurship of a family photo, right? Not making millions of dollars, but it was the same concept for me. And so I would say that is, you know, for you is to just, you know, make sure you are like, you know, love what you do is thrown around too often. No, make sure you feel passion and purpose about what you do, and you will enjoy it, and get rid of all the bullshit about that other people have told you. It's like honestly, like in entrepreneurship, the obvious one is like for a business guy, you know, and taking my company public, and I make a lot of money in cannabis, but like money's not that important to me. It's nice, and I would rather make a lot of money than make a little money. But what's really important to me is creativity, organizing people, the connection that we get, that we put ourselves out into the world and we get to enjoy it, you know. And so I started looking and go, wow, man, I used to think money was like up here, and now I realize it's like, I'm not even sure it cracks the top 10 and like actual, like what's important to me. And so it's just, I think that would what I would encourage you to do is challenge your own self-awareness about what motivates you, and find where your passion is, and then find purpose with your passion, and without thinking about like, you know, oh man, if I do this, my buddy, she won't dig that. If I show up and I tell her this is what I want to do, she's gonna be like, you got to be kidding me, right? But there's so many of us, so many people have found that their passion isn't in line and their purpose isn't in line with the immediate circle of their family and social connections. And they've had to challenge those people and those beliefs to go on and really be their greatest self. And that, I think, is the great challenge in life. And so, you know, I think that's the other drawback about people that try to emulate somebody else. You know, oh, I'm going to be like them. Only be like them if their passion and purpose is in line with yours. So I'm not sure what the question was, but I think that's the answer that I would hope to share.
Well, thank you very much. Again, it has truly been a pleasure and an honor to share this time with you. And to everybody who's listening and watching, I want to thank y'all very much. I want to thank you for sticking with us this whole time, for supporting this show. I love y'all. So thank you very much. And this special, super secret mystery bonus, all you have to do is go to projectegg.com projectdeg.co/Christian. Now, the reason I say it's a super secret mystery bonus is because we're going to keep it evergreen for you. We're going to make sure that regardless of when you're watching this, when you go to that resource, there's going to be something there for you, and it may not be the same thing that was there yesterday. So if you check back frequently, I'd encourage you to listen to this interview a couple times, because Christian, your wisdom is blowing me away, and I'm going to go back and listen a couple of times because there's so many layers to what you were saying, and it was so beautiful. It's just honestly, it's been blowing me away this whole time. So listen to this interview a couple of times, pick it apart, really take what you can from it, and go visit that resource. And like I said, it's going to change day to day. It might be different. So there's always going to be something for you, and you never know what that one thing will be that's going to click, that's going to make the difference in your life. So again, it's projectdeg.co/Christian. So again, Christian, thank you very much. To everybody who's listening, thank you very much. Let's change the world.
Thank you, Ben.